Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this Monday's edition of Alaska Weather, one week into February 2022. I'm David Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service. Up first, we've got Hazard's weather graphic here showing a widespread red area there from the eastern Arctic coast down across the eastern North Slope, eastern Brooks Range, and that's a wind chill warning out for tonight for wind chills to 65 degrees below zero. And then south of there, Koyukuk Valley down to Tanana, upper Yukon Valley, Yukon Flats area down to the mountains north of Fairbanks. Winter weather advisories out for tonight through tomorrow night into midday on Wednesday. And that's for snow, blowing snow, and wind chills to 55 degrees below zero. Winds gusting upwards of anywhere from 25 to 40 miles per hour or so, reducing visibilities and blowing snow down to a half mile or less at times. And then out in the west coast there, including St. Lawrence Island, Nunivak Island, and the Noatak Valley area, Seward Peninsula, that's a wind chill advisory out for tonight into early tomorrow morning for wind chills of 35 to 55 degrees below zero with those gusty northeast winds. And from there, moving on to satellite imagery, you can see the main feature there is that big push of moisture, the cloud mass frontal system pushing up pretty rapidly, making a pretty good jog to the northeast, up toward the northern panhandle, eastern North Gulf Coast. Rain now on the increase after a break today, tapering off, just areas of light showers scattered around the panhandle. But the clouds thickening, lowering once again, rain on the increase, especially on the north coast here later this afternoon. Same thing for the North Gulf Coast and pushing into Prince William Sound. Moderate to heavy snow now going on at Portage Glacier at the Visitor Center, where the observing site is there on near Portage Lake, and also into Prince William Sound. Light snow all day long in Valdez, a couple inches falling there. Kodiak had a third of an inch water equivalent precipitation. It fell mostly in the form of snow, but mixing with rain this afternoon. Temperatures rising into the upper 30s there with the warmer air. And you can see that whole system pushing northeastward as cold air pushes south and southwestward out over the entire Bering Sea down to the Aleutians. Temperatures below freezing, or freezing snowfall levels down to the surface, down to sea level, all the way to and south of the Aleutians there. And temperatures falling to just above zero over at St. Paul Island here currently at mid-afternoon today at 3 o'clock. 2 degrees above zero, the report there. So that's going to be definitely advancing the ice edge south and southwestward there. It's still a ways north of the island. You can see the clouds, the winds picking up moisture and clouds as it blows off the ice edge there. And on the chart, clear skies over the ice-covered area, mostly fair up to the north and up over the north slope, where temperatures this afternoon sitting in the mid-minus 40s in some areas. Cold spot that I could find, 51 below this morning at Dead Horse. And quite cold even into the Northwest Valleys, mid-minus 30s this afternoon. And pretty windy conditions, central interior, for example. Indian Mountain gusts 46 miles per hour to the east-northeast today. Not so windy at the lower elevations. And Kodiak only seeing 20 to 30 mile an hour northeast winds, tighter gradient off to the east there with that front moving northeastward, already farther than what I've got shown here on the chart at midday. At the front already pushing up closer into the southeast coast, rain increasing there along the north coast. And areas of snow, again, on the increase, south central Alaska. Areas of light snow up into the eastern interior areas, and then widespread snow over the Bering Sea south of the ice edge all the way down to the Aleutians. For tonight, that cold Arctic high holds over the north slopes. The temperatures, again, anywhere from 35 to 55 below zero for your overnight lows. But windy conditions in the interior, maybe some clouds and moisture moving in, might hold those temperatures up, but the wind chills will still be quite low. with the winter weather advisory and the snow and blowing snow moving into the Koyukuk Valley, into the Yukon Flats area, and still windy on the western Arctic coast. Wind starting to diminish, though, over the southern Bering Sea, and turning more easterly along the Aleutians, but cold air in place there as a big push Arctic air now just kind of settles in over the area. It'll be widespread light snow, snow showers, and possible IFR conditions all along up to the Alaska Peninsula, especially on the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. You'll see the lowest conditions, better on the Pacific side. And snow increases south central Alaska, Cook Inlet, right up Matanuska-Susitna Valley into the Kuskokwim Valley, possibly mixing with rain along the coast, or changing to just plain rain along the coastline with that warm southerly flow as that low center tracks northward to Kane's Head, mouth of Resurrection Bay there. Periods of rain and wind, heavy at times for the Panhandle. Forecast for tomorrow, that front moves on through. The low pressure moves up into the Susitna Valley, starts to weaken, periods of snow. Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet area, and back to the west to the Alaska Range across the northern Kuskokwim Valley. Starting to dry out a little bit there over the southwest part of the state, but low pressure lingering along the Yukon Delta coast, so snow chances continue for eastern Norton Sound through much of the interior there. And winds stay quite strong, especially the western Brooks Range. Today, Howard passing winds gusting 62 miles per hour, and it gave them a wind chill at one point of 93 degrees below zero. It'll still be quite cold and windy across all the Brooks Range through tomorrow. And another push of warm air, a lot of moisture, so periods of rain probably letting up from what it'll be tonight and early tomorrow for the Panhandle in the afternoon. But big flow of south-southwest fetching winds pulling a lot of moisture northward with that warm front as cold air continues to migrate southward over the Bering Sea. Surges of snow showers will enhance. Another one crosses the Pribilofs and out over the western Aleutians, and it'll stay snowy at times for the Fox Islands and Alaska Peninsula. Then for Wednesday, weak low forms just east of the Pribilofs there, and the cold air just off the ice edge, almost probably a polar low type of situation, with possible increase in the winds along with that feature, but right now it doesn't look to be too bad, with snow again over much of the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, and northward to even St. Lawrence Island might start picking up some flurries and snow shower conditions, and also along the southwest coast. Ridging over the western interior, cold, dry conditions there. Snow and periods of, for the Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet, Matanuska-Susitna Valley, periods of rain, Prince William Sound, eastern North Gulf Coast, heavy at times, say from Yakutat into the northern Panhandle, then lightening back up again down toward southern areas, Dixon Entrance, but still a very wet, windy, mild day coming up for the Panhandle, especially by comparison to the conditions to the west and the north. Picking up some clouds and moisture means rising temperatures for the North Slope and the eastern Arctic coast, as well as the northeast interior. Looking at lows tonight, anywhere from 25 to 55 below for the North Slope, milder on the Arctic coast there, 48 below, say, for Deadhorse, and 47 below for Arctic Village, 15 to 25 below central interior, and 25 to 30 below for the Kuskokwim Valley, and 15 to 25 below out along the coast, 15 below for the St. Lawrence Island area. Edging below zero, not too far from that -1 right now for St. Paul, drop a little bit more, and mid to upper teens for the central Aleutians, lower 20s shimmying at 2, and 5 to 15 for your lows for the Alaska Peninsula, and 0 to 12 below for Bristol Bay. Right around the frost point for Kodiak for your overnight low, staying above freezing there at sea level, and 20s across south central Alaska to lower 30s down toward Homer, and staying above freezing, of course, with a mild southerly flow over the Panhandle. That'll translate into highs in the lower to mid 40s there for the southeast coast, and lower 30s, 30 to 35, or right around freezing for south central Alaska, Copper River Basin, upper 20s to lower 30s, with that 34, the forecast for Valdez, edging above zero there for the greater Fairbanks area, but staying below zero back to the west, call it high of 4 for St. Paul, mid-20s for the central Aleutians, lower 20s for the Fox Islands, and 15 to 20 for your highs for the Alaska Peninsula, 0 to 5 for Bristol Bay, well below zero for the North Slope to the Arctic coast. Lows a little milder up north there, but still some areas could drop toward 50 degrees below zero over the North Slope, Umiat Airfield, for example. Otherwise milder 20s, south central Alaska, Copper River Basin in the mid-20s, and staying mild with that south to north flow or southwest flow, and a lot of moisture and clouds, rain, breezy conditions for the Panhandle, lows 40 to 45. Back down a little below zero for the Pribilofs, lower to mid-teens for the central Aleutians, quite cold for the Fox Islands, and 5 to 15 for your lows for the Alaska Peninsula. Highs Wednesday afternoon, 20 to 35 below north of the Brooks Range, and right around zero again in the Fairbanks area to 10 to 15, or Eagle might push up to 17, below zero back to the west, and upper 20s to near 30, south central Alaska, Kenai Peninsula, right around 31 Kodiak, pushing 50 over some locations of the Panhandle.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather, northern Bering Sea, Yukon Delta to the mid-Yukon River Valley. Northward, all VFR, except for marginal VFR just north of the western Brooks Range. Then IFR, narrow band there over the central Bering Sea across over the Pribilof Islands. Marginal VFR, southern Bering Sea, pretty widespread. Could be some areas of IFR in there along the Aleutians, but mostly marginal up and across the Alaska Peninsula to Kodiak Island. IFR, southern Cook Inlet. All the Gulf of Alaska, in across the Panhandle, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, western Alaska Range into the Kuskokwim Valley. And for the afternoon, let's see, there we go. Tuesday afternoon. Let me back that up to Tuesday morning. Not much change. So go to Wednesday morning. IFR, areas of central eastern Brooks Range, marginal VFR, portions of the North Slope, especially the eastern Arctic coast, VFR to the west. And for the North Gulf Coast, we've got IFR, pretty widespread, into Cook Inlet, Kodiak Island, solid IFR across the Panhandle. And looks like some of that getting into the Kuskokwim Valley, but VFR, higher pressure out over the southwest interior, up to the mid-Yukon River Valley areas. Marginal VFR continues for the Aleutians and southern Bering Sea. And for the Wednesday afternoon outlook, IFR, central interior, down into the Susitna Valley, possibly the Manduska Valley, with IFR, eastern North Gulf Coast, and across the northern Panhandle, eastern Panhandle as well, and then down toward Dixon Entrance. Marginal VFR there from Port Alexander, Sitka, those areas, possibly over toward Petersburg. And then areas of IFR with mostly marginal VFR and some scattered areas of VFR out over the Bering Sea. Passes, Anatuvik and Adigan, VFR tomorrow. Both passes either approach, looking good up that way. Lake Clark and Merrill, though, IFR. And rainy, marginal VFR. Windy looks occasionally marginal tomorrow. And Isabel looks VFR. Pretty good from Intest as well. VFR flying southern and northern approach. Tanita, marginal VFR, lowest conditions, eastern entrance. A little better to the west. And for Portage, IFR, possible low IFR in the eastern entrance. Chilkoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels right across Cook Inlet tomorrow morning, just north of the Alaska Peninsula and north of the Aleutians. And the Copper River Basin, 2,000 feet up into the Gulf of Alaska there, cutting across the central Panhandle. And icing. Areas of icing pushing up into the interior from southwest to northeast into the North Gulf Coast, and then tapering off over Cook Inlet in the afternoon, the southwest interior areas. But Norton Sound right on the western edge there. Pretty clear out over the Bering Sea as far as icing goes, as well as the North Slope Arctic coast and the southwest interior to the Alaska Peninsula. Kodiak Island, some icing starting to creep up towards Sitkinak late in the day with the next surge of moisture. Otherwise, areas of mixed icing out over the entire Aleutian chain, southern Bering Sea. Jet stream, cold upper low, several centers there. One up over the east central Arctic coast, another over the Seward Peninsula. And the third one there, just south of St. Matthew Island, pulling a lot of cold air down into the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. To the east, southwest jet starts out 75 knots there over the Fox Islands, picks up to about 115 knots over the Aleutian Range. And then as it blows across the Gulf of Alaska, west-southwesterly is 135 knots. Fall back to about 120 knots. Pretty good jet, though, and across the central Panhandle. And at 9,000 feet, got low pressure at this elevation just south of Unalaska Island there. And southwest winds 45 knots into Bristol Bay with a low along the southwest coast. On the north side of that low, winds are easterly to northeasterly, strongest over the Russian Far East, but 40 to 60 knot winds there over the western Brooks Range and along mountains out toward Kivalina, Point Hope. Lighter over the eastern interior Copper River Basin, especially the eastern Copper River Basin, picking up toward 50 to 65 knots, and 70 knot west-southwesterlies in across the southern panhandle. 3,000 feet east-northeasterlies, 60 knots there along the northwest coast and the southern Chukchi Sea, just clipping western St. Lawrence Island. Otherwise, southwest, 45 knots or so, Prince William Sound, and maybe 30 knots northern panhandle, increased to 55 knots over the Queen Charlottes, and turbulence.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
The Space Weather Prediction Center has had a long-standing relationship with the power industry, so they've been aware that solar storms, the geomagnetic storm piece of that, can affect the operation of their systems and induce extra currents and loads on those systems that can either trip those systems offline or in the worst of cases, cause damage. That relationship goes back for several decades. In fact, a big incident in 1989 where part of Quebec was tripped offline that affected something like 6 million customers for about 9 hours. I think that really raised the awareness in the power industries.
When we get the alert, we watch the grid and start looking for issues. Are we seeing a decline in voltage? Are we seeing equipment failures? And we readjust the system to try to mitigate those problems, try to keep the lights on and keep it from going out.
Averaging about 500, 550 kilometers per second.
If we didn't have this early warning, we wouldn't see it until our sensor saw it. Getting more information quicker and faster before the storm hits, not during the storm, is a big improvement.
In the long term, I think what we need and what we're moving toward, the U.S. as a whole, is better modeling, fully understanding this phenomenon, understanding how it would impact specific systems.
Rather than actually experiencing a storm, we can simulate storms in our software and see what the impact is. We try to get ahead of it. We always plan that if there's an outage, how can we keep the lights on? What's the best process to prevent it?
In the end, 5-10 years from now, there's going to be a whole mix of operational procedures driven by what we do on prediction and warning. And then there also will probably be some level of hardware controls to ensure the reliability of the grid.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
There's different types of impacts on communication systems, and the HF we call the high frequency, which is that band of communications 3 to 30 megahertz. But it's a very important band of radio communication because it's used widespread. It's used, for example, by the airlines.
HF radio is most commonly used for position reporting when you're going across the ocean airspace, which is devoid of radar. And ATC can't see you, so it's up to you to report your position and your altitude and your speed.
HF works great most of the time, except during a big flare. And during a big flare, that HF communication capability could be gone within a minute or two. So as soon as we see something happening in there, or we see a flare, it's one of the first things we do is alert the aviation community, hey, big flare, HF's going to be impacted.
Once we know that there's an event going on, then the aviation industry and the airlines can react to that. They can alter their routes over the poles. They can lower the altitudes that they're flying at, or maybe decide not to fly at all in the interest of the passenger safety.
So that's just one example of how HF is used, but the emergency response community will use it a lot too. It's one of their primary backups.
When you've lost connectivity between certain government agencies, it gives you that long-range coverage to talk from out-of-state to federal governments or from the FEMA locations to the state emergency operations centers.
So if you've got a big hurricane impact in the coastline, whatever big city, we've got the cell towers down and whatnot, we've got emergency communication folks in there. Those folks are very familiar with space weather and how it impacts their systems.
Here in recent years, it was used during Katrina when we had a lot of communications outages down there. It was also used during Hurricane Ike. There was an outage of the telephone circuits with the Texas State Emergency Office, so it was used in both of those situations.
So when we talk about backup, especially for the airlines, typically they'll have SATCOM, so that'll be satellite communication.
The satellite technology that emergency responders use could be GPSs, could be satellite phones, satellite data terminals.
Space weather events can impact SATCOMs. The impact can range from a nuisance to loss of a spacecraft. So we will give them the heads up. If we have space weather events, flares, whatnot, they need to know what's impacting their systems. Situational awareness is key. Time is of essence to these folks. Again, it's life and death.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at the sea ice from 2 days ago, 5th of February, and comparing it to today, you can see some changes. One is advancing southwestward at a pretty good pace here. There we go. Pretty noticeable there. And Togiak Bay, northern Bristol Bay, that area thinning out due to the winds blowing the ice away from the shore, but new ice forming and is forming over the open area from the ice that's being blown out to sea. And that's going to continue for the next couple of days. Pretty good advance to the southwest, maybe as much as 40 nautical miles. Moving on to coastal water forecast, small craft advisories along the Panhandle coastline. South winds 25 knots, seas 14 to 16 feet. Small craft advisories for Clarence Strait. Southeast winds 25 knots, seas up to 13 feet. 20-knot winds and only 4-foot seas in the forecast for Stevens Passage. Small craft advisories for Lynn Canal. South winds 25 knots, seas 5 feet. Small craft advisories continue for Wednesday on the outer coastline. A little bit stronger, southwest 30 knots for the central and south coast. Seas definitely higher, just under 20 feet. And the north coast about the same, but more southerly on the wind direction at 30 knots. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, northern inner channel. Small craft advisories for Wednesday, south winds 25 knots and 20-knot winds for the central and southern inner channels with 4 to 5 foot seas. Gale warnings for Prince William Sound on Tuesday. Southwest winds 35 knots, seas up to 8 feet, and also gale warnings for the North Gulf Coast. South to southwest winds 30 to 35 knots. Gale warnings for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay. West winds 35 knots, seas 12 to 15 feet. Small craft advisory, Southern Cook Inlet, southwest winds 30 knots with 10-foot seas, but a gale warning for Northern Cook Inlet for southerly winds at 35 knots. Those will fall back to brisk wind advisories on Wednesday for Northern Cook Inlet with south winds at 25 knots, southwest 30 knots south of the Forelands, and gale warnings continue for the Kamishak Bay area for west winds at 35 knots, Barren Islands, western North Gulf Coast, gale warnings as well, southwest 35 knots. And southwest 30 knots for the zone around Middleton Island. Prince William Sound, south winds 25 knots, seas 6 feet. Kodiak Island, gale warning west-southwest, 30 to 35 knots, seas 10 to 15 feet. Alaska Peninsula, north to northwest winds 20 to 25 knots. And for Bristol Bay, west winds 20 knots with 5-foot seas. And then for Wednesday, for Bristol Bay, southwest winds 25 knots, seas in the ice-free areas at 3 feet. Alaska Peninsula, small craft advisory, southwest winds 25 to 30 knots, and west winds 30 knots from Chignik to Sitkinak. And gale warnings for Kodiak Island, southwest winds 35 knots. On Alaska Island for Tuesday, north winds 20 to 25 knots, Unamak Island north 20 knots, Adak and Atka north to northeast winds at 20 knots. Small craft advisories on Chitka Peninsula westward to Shimia for northeast winds at 25 knots. For Wednesday, Shimia to Nikolsky, northwest winds 15 knots. Fox Islands, Unalaska Island specifically, southwest winds 20 to 30 knots, 9 to 11 foot seas. For the southwest coast on Tuesday, northwest winds 20 knots, north 30 knots for St. Matthew Island, then back down to 20 knots from the north for the Pribilofs with 7 foot seas. Gale warnings for St. Lawrence Island, north winds 35 knots, and brisk wind advisories for Norton Sound for 30 knot winds out of the northeast. Outlook for Wednesday, Norton Sound, winds really come down there, down to 10 knots out of the northeast. Stay a little brisk, brisk wind advisory St. Lawrence Island, but coming down a little bit from Tuesday's values north of 30 knots. And south of Nunivak Island, southwest at 20, Pribilofs northwest at 20. Small craft advisory St. Matthew Island, north winds 30 knots. East-northeast winds for the Arctic coast 10 to 15 knots, but from Cape Beaufort to Wales, gale warnings, north to northeast winds 30 to 35 knots. And those come down to brisk wind advisories, Wales to Cape Beaufort, north 25 to 30 knots, 15 knot northeast winds for the central and western Arctic coast, eastern Beaufort Sea coast, east winds 20 to 25 knots. For tonight, winds are light up there along the coast and north slope with cold high pressure, keeping temperatures well below zero, but winds on the increase over interior Alaska as low pressure tracks up toward the Kenai Peninsula, and wind heavy at times with rain over the Panhandle, snow and colder temperatures over the Bering Sea and Aleutians. That holds through Tuesday, but winds lightening up out west. Next surge of moisture pushing up toward the Panhandle pushes northward.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.